Welcome to Sweater Weather, a podcast about Canadian arts and culture. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Naomi.
So we just watched a movie I've been meaning to watch for a while.
On CBC Gem.
Called BlackBerry.
And it's about the phone.
It's about the phone.
The X phone. BlackBerry.
I heard it was good. It came out last year, 2023. And it won a bunch of Canadian Screen Awards. Mm-hmm. I noticed that on Twitter. Someone said that. They're not exactly the Oscars. But it did win many, like 15 or something like that.
Yeah, and totally deserved it, as we found out yesterday. It was really good.
It's true. It's a really good movie.
Yeah.
Very, very fun. The BlackBerry, I guess, I never had a BlackBerry. We're certainly old enough to have had BlackBerries, but I didn't ever have one. Did you ever have one?
No, I didn't. Do you remember knowing people who had them, or when you first learned about them?
I stayed away from the cell phone game a long time, generally a long time. The first cell phone I got was when I went to Italy in 2002, and then I got a little flip phone because I needed obviously to have some kind of independent communications device.
And when was that?
2002.
2002.
So, the BlackBerry device, the movie begins in 1996. I don't really know the exact timeline of the BlackBerry.
Oh, no, I mean the BlackBerry, okay, you quickly look that up. But I remember people having BlackBerries when I was first aware of it in 2002, 2003. I feel like it was someone I knew had one in grad school, and it was really weird to me. I was just like, what is that thing, and why do you want it, and what's it for? And it was definitely different from a cell phone, because before that, I had owned a cell phone, and it was just a flip phone, and my friends and I would use them to plan when to hang out or whatever after work. But it was
novelty still.
Yeah, and it was kind of I didn't totally understand why someone would need to have access to email and all this stuff all the time.
That's
and
so
it
you
just
can be
seemed kind of
constantly
pointless.
working.
And then he would have, my friend who had one had his schedule on it, I guess, and his email and stuff. But because he was the only person who had it, it seemed kind of novel, both novel and slightly annoying. You'd be talking to him and he'd be on it, and it just seemed like this bad habit almost.
So I looked it up here. The first BlackBerry device was 1999. The movie begins in 1996 with the phone in development, and the iPhone. Then it kind of peaks. It's kind of over by 2007 when the iPhone is released, and the screen-only interface destroys the BlackBerry type interface. So it's fun thing about this movie is that you're reminded of it is quite nostalgic. It has this documentary style. It's shaky camera. I don't know if you noticed. Maybe it's the earliest part of the movie or the whole movie. Can't remember. It has a yellowish tinge. It's old. Something old. So it does really scratch those nostalgic pleasure centers or whatever.
And there's just so much 90s technology and 90s movies and 90s music referenced all through the whole thing. 90s fashions and
it's reminding you of a time when not everybody had cell phones that they were always looking at and typing on. And so, you're that first, I think I have vague memories of the first time seeing people on their BlackBerries, and you're just stop it. What are you doing?
Yeah, it seems really, really annoying and antisocial and an addictive, but extremely trying behavior. And I remember a friend of mine whose father got one, and then she said it was her parents' marriage was suffering because of it. Because she, they'd go out for dinner and the father would pull out the BlackBerry, and it was what kind of person, is on a little computer while you're hanging out with them. It's just so.
There's a funny scene in the movie where I guess there's an attempt to infiltrate elite high income spaces country clubs with the BlackBerry. And so they send their salespeople out to play tennis and have whiskey and cigars in these elite lounges and stuff. And there's a really funny scene of a guy laughing really loudly and clicking on his BlackBerry all by himself, and everyone in the restaurant's looking at him.
He has a cigar clenched between his teeth and a big glass of whiskey, and he's laughing like a maniac looking at his BlackBerry.
Yeah, then all these rich people in suits are turning around and looking at him and going, what's with this guy? But of course they're all gonna get one themselves. Fun scene. Yeah, the BlackBerry, I never had one. I did have a friend who was addicted to his BlackBerry, and then even well into the iPhone's reign was making special attempts to get a BlackBerry with the keyboard.
Mm-hmm. With
course,
a keyboard. I thought we all had keyboards.
Instead of the iPhone.
The
iPhone was already ubiquitous and dominant.
And some people wanted the keyboard.
It was hard to get a BlackBerry.
Okay. Yeah. At that point, it's like kind of retro or whatever. Like I knew so little about BlackBerry that I didn't know that it was invented in Canada, let alone that it was invented in Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize actually like how popular it was when it hit its peak. I really didn't realize that.
At half of the cell phone market.
Yeah. Because like, I kind of, maybe I'm just kind of clueless about these things, but with a lot of these devices, I remember them coming out, and some people I knew being, whether a device or an app or like even like social media, like when Facebook was first a thing, like I just remember people being into it, and like every single time, like with the iPad too, I'm thinking like, why, like what's that for? Like I don't get why anyone would want that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's how I felt about BlackBerry. That's how I felt about the iPhone. That's how I felt about the iPad. That's how I felt about Facebook. Like I was always like, what is this thing? Like what could it possibly be good for?
Mm-hmm. And now that we have it and we're can't live without it, I have the same question. What is this good for? Why?
Yeah, it's almost like I feel like I've gotten sort of sucked in, and like now I have to have it because everybody else does, and then it is addictive. But at the same time, like I don't necessarily feel like, I don't feel like I was missing something really vital before I had it. Like maybe the opposite, though. I'm sure there's some good things about these devices and apps and stuff. Anyway, we should be talking about the movie, not just about like what we think about this technology. But one thing I wanted to say is like near the beginning, there was like a kind of neat montage that I thought was really clever, where it kind of, I think it was during the first credits. They had kind of showing like sort of fictional devices from pop culture, like the tricorder was on there, like devices that kind of were fictional, but then inspired, what ultimately became the smartphone. And like, so yeah, the tricorder on Star Trek, and like Inspector Gadget's like gadget watch where he can like make it do anything. And like, I can't remember all the examples, but it was just showing how like for ages in popular culture, we had this idea in science fiction of a device like a smartphone that you could, basically a little computer that you carry around. Yeah, and then we see how BlackBerry was the first company that actually managed to figure out how to do it. And I can't say that I really understand like the technicalities of like what the problem was and how they solved it, but it is interesting that like this idea was in people's minds and in our kind of collective consciousness long before anyone figured out how to actually make it happen. And then it was BlackBerry that did, or this one particular guy, Mike Lazaridis. Yeah.
So Mike Lazaridis is played by Jay Baruchel. Mike Lazaridis, the guy, I guess, who's credited with inventing the BlackBerry and the smartphone, played by Jay Baruchel. Then this other guy, Doug Fregan, who's a super nerd. He wears a Doom t-shirt and a headband, and he's kind of like a rocker and a chill. He's like kind of the apex tech nerd. And like, I guess in real life, Mike and Doug, they were childhood friends, and they did the tech to invent the BlackBerry themselves. And the movie begins, they have this company, Research in Motion, and they're trying to get funding so that they can expand their operations and produce this cell phone they have an idea for. I don't think they have the name for it yet.
And is that Mike guy like famous for that hair? Is that why he has that hair?
No, the only person I'd ever heard of having to do with BlackBerry is Jim Balsillie, and that makes perfect sense given the kind of society and culture we live in. As this was the big businessman,
like and the front man,
and he came in to, as the movie shows, he came in later, and he's played in the movie by Glenn Howerton from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is so funny. And this Jim Balsillie is bald, and he's like a super intense, tough guy.
Yeah, he's like Tom Cruise in Tropic Thunder.
Or Tom Cruise in almost anything.
Yeah, with that like really fierce look on his face.
He's bald like Tom Cruise in Tropic Thunder, yeah.
Right.
But he's got the energy of Tom Cruise. And I didn't know Glenn Howerton could do that because I've only seen him as a goofy guy.
I've never seen him before. I've never seen that show, but
Anyway, it's great. The cast is awesome. The guy who plays Doug, his name's Matt Johnson. He's a Canadian comic actor, right? From Nirvana, the band, the show. I think that's what it's called. Nirvana. It's like an indie comedy series that I've seen a little bit of.
And what else has Jay Baruchel been on?
Well, Jay Baruchel is, he's famous for having done all of those Judd Apatow movies. He did a whole bunch of them. He was always like part of the cast for those Judd Apatow movies, and he also was in a very Canadian movie I think he produced about hockey called Goon. Okay. He's like a hockey fan, and his buddy is is like an enforcer who beats people up on the ice.
I think I just don't watch enough TV or movies, but that guy, I definitely have seen him in something before.
Jay Baruchel is like a stoner kind of guy. That's partly his public persona or comedic persona.
Okay.
Perfect matching with Glenn Howerton, who is the intense Tom Cruise type in this. So they're kind of it's fun to see those two guys together, actually. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's a good pairing, but this is a very funny movie. Like, I was surprised I knew it was a docu-series. Well, that's another thing. We saw it as a 3-part series. That's how it was presented on Gem. And so there's 3 episodes, but it was also a theatrical release that was just one movie. Mm-hmm. Apparently the 3-part series has extra footage, something like 15 minutes.
Okay, so we saw something or other that people didn't see in the film in theaters. Well, I mean, so the movie that this like kind of begs comparison with is The Social Network, because that kind of has similar, I mean, it's about the rise, and in this case then fall of, well, in that case it was an app, in this case a device, but a technology invented by kind of like these like prototypical nerd characters who then join forces with the kind of prototypical salesman characters. And then there's this kind of, like the kind of weird genius who comes up with the idea and figures out how to make it work. I mean, I guess in the case of BlackBerry, is more figuring out how to make it work. He didn't come up with the idea. It was more like an idea that had been around forever, and he figured out how to actually make it happen. Mm-hmm. But then, and in The Social Network, it was really coming up with an idea that somehow became like the best or the most addictive idea ever, but that I don't think people had really thought about very much before it actually happened. But in both cases, it's kind of this one person that comes up with it and then gathers a team around them, or a team gathers around them and wants to be part of it and wants their piece and wants to bring it to like a broader public and to turn it into whatever they see it as. And then they have to like kind of start navigating the business world in this way that like they don't necessarily have any experience with or any interest in. And then it becomes this like enormously successful technological advancement or whatever, evolution, that kind of becomes ubiquitous. Yeah. So it's really interesting in that way to see how something that, and I mean, there's this kind of weird sense that I found watching both those movies that's comparable, that, you realize this thing that's become part of your life and part of your world and part of like the texture of society, like a few short years ago just didn't even exist. And it wasn't something that you ever thought about or missed or like wished you had. And now it's just almost baked into like the human consciousness in this weird way.
What's really fun about this movie, it's in 3 parts. So there's basically the rise, and then there's the peak, and then there's the fall of BlackBerry, is that we get to see the how exactly something that is so ubiquitous like came in, like entered our lives and our culture. So little thing like when they're in a pitch meeting to Bell Atlantic, and they have just like a prototype of the BlackBerry that's like an assemblage, a Frankenstein assemblage of children's toys that they just got from Toys R Us and took bits and like kind of like stuck them together. They give this prototype to the executive they're trying to sell it to, and he doesn't know how to use it. It has these buttons on it. And Jay Baruchel's character, Mike, says, "Oh, you have to," and he makes a gesture which is so universal now.
Yeah.
Which is like, you got to use your thumbs. And
Try typing with your thumbs.
He does this gesture of, of course, how we all type now on our phones. And this is the first time someone had to learn how to type with their thumbs.
Yeah.
And that is such an interesting moment in human evolution.
It is. And it's just so interesting that it happened not that long ago. And you think about, I mean, to me, it's just like this really jarring thing. You think about like how long you've been alive and experiencing your life and thinking of yourself as like basically having been the same person. But, like 15 years ago, none of us had ever typed with our thumbs or whatever. And none of us had a smartphone or had ever heard of a smartphone and like never thought like, how do I live without having a computer in my pocket?
Yeah.
And now you just can't. You can't really function without one. Unless you're like going to be a complete hermit or whatever. I mean, people do. Some people don't have them, but it's really like eccentric not to have one at this point.
It's actually impossible to access like a lot of online services without a cell phone because you need it for
not just a cell phone, a smartphone.
You need a smartphone so that you can receive texts and confirmations for security purposes. So actually, you can't participate in a lot of elements of contemporary society without a smartphone.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And so, like, what do you think, like, worked best about the movie as a movie?
Well, it's very funny. It is very well written. It is people with real comic chops did it. Mm-hmm. It moves along very nicely. So this is a story that takes place over, I guess, essentially about 10 years, and it clips right along. You're never bored. I mean, one of the big appeals I've already mentioned is the time capsule nostalgic thing. Like they put in a lot of like Canadian rock of the era, like there's like Matthew Good in the background. You're like, oh yeah, that's a rockin' song. or there's Jim Balsillie, who's like famously a big hockey fan because he tried to like later on after he became multimillionaire, maybe billionaire, he was trying to buy a hockey club and move it to Hamilton. The movie depicts this as part of his personal downfall, is that he's distracted by trying to do these hockey deals instead of taking care of his BlackBerry business properly. So there's all these scenes of like 1990, early in the movie 1996, Doug Gilmour, playing on the Leafs or whatever, and so those are just like coming from Southern Ontario, grew up with the Toronto Maple Leafs of that era. So
you're from relatively near that.
Sure, yeah.
Where that takes place, yeah.
Yeah, I think another big part of the movie that works is the comic contrast between the nerdy tech guys, the engineers, and like the scenes of them like watching they're like, is it Wednesday movie night or whatever, where they're just allowed to watch like a fun science fiction movie instead of work that day.
Yeah.
And then the contrast with that with the Jim Balsillie, and then later on this other guy played by Michael Ironside, who's a big tough guy trying to crack the whip on them and make them be more productive and more
change their office culture.
Yeah, and you see over time their office culture does change, and I think that's part of what the movie is saying, is that BlackBerry lost its heart and soul when it became just like another corporate company. Yeah,
and they have this whole conceit about like how Mike Lazaridis would never let outsource to China for the assembly of his
it was all North American made.
And that like the very first scene he's trying to fix like a made in China product that's an intercom that's buzzing and will never stop buzzing, and he like takes it apart and gets in there and fixes it and says like our devices always buzz because they're made in China by engineers that are working too quickly, don't care what they're doing, trying to make a quick buck or whatever. And then by the end, his downfall is that he agrees to have his latest BlackBerry design, which is basically trying to be like an iPhone.
Right.
He agrees to have it like manufactured in China so that it can be done fast enough to be a competitor with the iPhone, and then that, spoiler alert,
it's the very final scene,
leads to the company's complete collapse because they're made so quickly that they're all defective.
Yeah, I do remember this vaguely from real life. The kind of the BlackBerry's attempt to do an iPhone type full screen interface was rushed to market and very defective, and that, I guess, that signaled the end. Basically. Yeah,
I mean, it said that like all of those were like almost all of them had to be sent back. Like none of them, they just didn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah, a complete disaster. And he like just sold out all his ideals is the way that the movie depicts it. Like he hated the idea of a smart screen. He hated the idea of no keyboard. He hated the idea of cheap overseas manufacturing, all of that. And like all the things that he didn't believe in, he just said, fine, we'll do it. And then, I mean, it would have fallen apart anyway, but as a story, it kind of implies that it's because he, turned away from his ideals that it all fell apart.
That's right. Yeah.
And the office culture is part of that he turns to the dark side of like not having fun at work.
Yes. By the end of it, by part 3, he's older. His gray hair, very gray hair is longer now.
And whiter.
And he's just not like a fun tech kid anymore. He's like he's a dour businessman, and he's worried about making enough money and being productive enough. A point about the conflict of business culture and the relaxed, creative engineering culture is when Jim Balsillie kind of arrives. Is it? No, it's not actually. So when the character played by Michael Ironside arrives, he's a new chief operations officer, and he's supposed to be tough and crack the whip on everyone. And he like walks into the room where everybody's just like got their feet up and are like, whatever, drinking Coke and like throwing paper airplanes or whatever. And a lot of course, playing role-playing games on their computers and stuff. And
multiplayer games, yeah.
Yeah, and like Michael Ironside is like, you're all children, aren't you? And they've never, and these engineers who've been working, they've never met this guy before. And the engineer's like, who are you?
Yeah.
And Michael Ironside just ignores him and keeps going like, little boys playing with their little penises. And then for comic effect, it cuts to like the one woman engineer in the room and like her reaction to that.
Yeah, that was good. But yeah, there's all these like their beloved toilet plunger that's stuck on top of one of the computers. Like you see it sitting in the garbage can, and it's like, the good nerdy times are over. Like the whole point of working here is destroyed. Like now we're just trying to make money at any, like no matter what. And like they've already made so much money, but it's not enough. It's kind of the implication. Although like when you really think about it, it was all gonna fall apart no matter what they did. Like the iPhone, the touch screen was gonna render them obsolete either way. Like it didn't matter whether they had a good attitude or a bad attitude.
It's just a more flexible interface. It was just gonna work better.
Yeah, but then there's the whole side of it where Jim Balsillie and Mike Lazaridis are this odd couple where there's the like shy like nerd, the shy genius, and the like more than shy, like what's the word? He's kind of like a shrinking violet, like he's self-effacing. And Jim Balsillie is like is depicted as the absolute opposite, where he's just like fierce and
he's an asshole,
aggro, like all the time,
super aggro.
And we see him in this scene at, like near the beginning where he's alone at home watching hockey, and like even sitting by himself watching hockey, he has this like incredibly fierce, like Tom Cruise-ish look on his face. So like we understand later, like it's not just a persona. Like he's never different. He never is just like chilling. Like he's always this fierce.
Well, what we realize later is that like while he's watching hockey on TV, he's planning. He's like, and one day I'm gonna own one of these freaking hockey teams.
Yeah,
like even in that moment he's thinking, but we don't know what that means.
Well, that does set up his love of hockey. Yes.
Yeah, the love of hockey's real. There's some fun archival footage of Don Cherry, like,
praising.
Jim Balsillie, he's a real hockey guy. He loves hockey.
That's right. That was great.
That was fun.
So he's like they're depicted as this odd couple where they're extremely diametrically opposed in personality.
And there's a love triangle, right? A friendship triangle.
Yeah, with Doug.
Because there's Doug, who's Mike's original friend and partner, who's just always the cool, chill engineering guy. And so he kind of gets pushed out of the circle.
That's right.
Because Jim and Mike take over.
That's right. And he's like a big defender of like continuing to have the office culture, because he says, this is why people work here. Like people work here like 80 hours a week, and it's because it doesn't suck to work here.
And it's fun because early on, like I think in the first scene, Doug is wearing a Doom, the video game T-shirt. Right. And I was like, oh yeah, Doom. That's like, I remember playing Doom
Yeah.
It was a first person shooter game. You're like going out shooting monsters and stuff.
Yeah.
And it comes back later because they hire an engineer who I guess invented or designed Doom, the video game, and that engineer is important.
And he's like the only person in the world they say that could like
do certain things. That they need done.
And also like another great thing about Doug is he's wearing this like headband
the whole time.
Like over like decades of
there's like a whole this movie covers 10 years and every single scene he's wearing the same headband.
Even when he's wearing like a suit or whatever.
He still has the
headband.
Now the real Doug, like what's fun, we find this out at the end, is that he was the one guy who got away unscathed from BlackBerry, because BlackBerry, went from I think a peak of something like 150 or 200 something dollars per share, and then that in 2007. And as soon as the iPhone was released, their share price began to drop. So it was exactly when the iPhone was released that Doug, who saw which way the wind was blowing, sold the I guess his 3% of the company that he owned, and he came away a billionaire.
Yeah.
Well, other people lost a lot of their money because they held on to the shares longer.
But it wasn't just that the iPhone came along. Like the other thing that happened was that Jim Balsillie had stock options
for employees and about how stocks were valued. And so they did go to court, and BlackBerry had to pay millions in fines, but I don't believe anybody was convicted of fraud. So, but it's interesting because Jim Balsillie's name is, I believe, still on the University of Waterloo's School of International Affairs. He made a big donation, I'm assuming, and got his name on there. So they
were sued by Verizon, it said, for $500 million.
Yeah, so he didn't really, I guess like the movie, I hadn't thought about BlackBerry or Jim Balsillie ever since BlackBerry just kind of fell out of the public consciousness. And to see him in this movie, you're like, oh, it's suggesting that there was like, that he's a jerk, and also that there's some shady practices, and that his reputation was not untarnished after what happened with BlackBerry. And I never thought of him again, really, since BlackBerry.
Yeah, I mean, like the movie, obviously, I mean, I don't know the real story. Like I said, I didn't really know anything about it, but the movie obviously like simplifies characters and personalities and relationships, and I mean, at the end, like it says, it doesn't say whatever happened to Mike Lazaridis.
It doesn't, does it?
I don't know if but I feel like they didn't really want, like the implication was that he went down with the ship, that he was like this tragic hero in a way.
I think both him and Jim Balsillie were there until 2012, and then 2012, really the bottom totally fell out.
Okay, but like, I mean, he's probably not poor, he's probably not ruined. He probably
he's a Canadian businessman and investor.
Okay, so like he's fine. And I mean, the movie kind of wanted us to believe he was completely destroyed. That, he's the guy that invented the smartphone, changed our whole world, and that nobody cares and nobody remembers. And I mean, like, obviously that works really well for the story.
He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 2014. So he has like in the Order of Canada. Okay. He's an officer of the Order of Canada, but that was still back when BlackBerry was big in 2006.
But I mean, he's not like a huge name, like, even, like your
It's not like Apple.
Steve Jobs.
Because I mean, that's the alternative history of BlackBerry, is that they became a stable, ongoing company, like an Apple or a Microsoft, but a Canadian version of that. And they didn't. It was a rapid rise and a rapid fall. And they weren't able to convert what they were doing into a sustainable, ongoing kind of business practice.
And I mean, also at that point, like there were other similar products on the market. Like you could have a Palm Pilot, or you could have a this or that or the other thing. Like I don't even remember what the other ones were. But then iPhone just became, well, not ubiquitous. Now there's like the Samsung and the Huawei and whatever. It's not the only smartphone, but like as you were saying yesterday, Aaron, privately, to me, like all the smartphones are basically the same.
They're all the same now. Apple, I mean, they're all the same. They're the same size. They have the same capabilities. They're lasting longer now too, because they're not able to. I feel like they're not able to invent.
Like each model isn't like a whole new thing.
No, and there was a period where they're really small or really big or like different colors, and like iPhone was really a lot different than Android, and it's just really, it seems to me that they're all very similar.
You get the same apps. Like everything's compatible.
It's like we've reached peak smartphone, and it's like that technology doesn't seem to be transformative anymore.
I mean, yeah, who knows? But yeah, at least for now, that does definitely seem to be the case.
Let's see here. Yeah, technically Jim Balsillie resigned his role as chairman of RIM when the firm reported $250 million in past stock option accounting errors.
Okay.
Errors. $250 million in errors.
I mean, they definitely kind of foreshadowed this whole thing too through the film, where, you know, they're offering contracts to people, and every now and then someone is like, "Is this legal?" And then Jim's like, "Oh, don't worry about it." And you don't really know what's going on. But this is how they attracted, according to the movie, all these engineers away. Like, they got people to come from Google and to
live in Waterloo.
Yeah. And then that's what ultimately they're caught. Like, why did all these people come here? What did you give them? And it was not something legal.
Yeah, like briefly Waterloo was like a center of the tech industry,
right? Because
of BlackBerry. And I don't really know the status of Waterloo's tech industry now. You certainly don't hear about it anymore, but there must probably some lasting legacy of BlackBerry in the area.
And like, they do depict the office as this kind of prototype of like the Silicon Valley office.
Well, they I don't know if like how true that is, or if I was wondering like, this is the office that you see. This is the kind of workspace you see in any show about Silicon Valley, where
like tech people are playing their Halo or whatever at the same time. Or not Halo, whatever it is. I don't know what they're playing.
Doom. But then a really funny line is...
And ping pong and like sleeping in a beanbag or whatever.
A funny line from the first part of the movie when it's still 1996, and one of the engineers is like playing... he's on a bulletin, early internet site, maybe like a AOL chat site or something. That says you can see from a distance that it's Star Trek, and it says Star Trek on the screen, and and he yells across the room to Mike. He's like, "Some dude's trying to say that Noonie and Soong is a Q." It's just such insider baseball for Star Trek fans. But we both knew what that meant.
Yeah, because nice. We are Star Trek
We just
fans.
Rewatched all of Star Trek Next Generation as well. Really funny scenes where they're trying to negotiate, like Doug and Mike are trying to plan to negotiate with Jim Balsillie to bring him on board. Jim Balsillie wants too much money. He wants too big of a percentage of the company. And they're like they have this little play acting thing where Doug's pretending to be Jim and be a hard ass negotiator. And he's like, at one point, he's like, 50% for $50. I just thought it was cute.
Yeah, and like I really liked how, you know, Jim, again, like whether this is real life or exaggerated in the movie, he knows nothing whatsoever about how the device works, or like,
I know
what, and he'll
that's very unrealistic.
Yeah, but it's great. Like it works really well in the film.
Dramatically, it's perfect because it's like Jim Balsillie's like in a pitch meeting at Verizon, and he doesn't know. Like, he's surprised to hear Mike explain how the phone works.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the part where they're trying to explain, like, we can't sell more phones because it'll overload the network, and he just like cannot understand. Like, there's not enough data. Like, he just can't understand what they're talking about. He doesn't care, and he's like, "Well, I'm going to sell them. You figure it out." And then at one point he's like, "Okay, explain to me what it means."
Yeah, he's like, "Okay, how does this phone work? What is this thing of it?" Like, it's really fun. This is the guy trying to sell the phones to everybody.
Yeah,
it's really
like he neither knows nor wants to know.
It's a fun dynamic. It's just a fun source of tension between the two. Completely unrealistic that the main salesman wouldn't be able to just even speak in layman's terms about.
Yeah, but I mean, it also really points to how most of us don't know how it works, and like
that's true.
How, you know, the fact is that we don't know how our computers work. We don't know how our phones work. We don't know how any of this stuff really works. And I mean, when they were explaining why, like the BlackBerry, why other companies, cell phone companies hadn't managed to do this before, like I was like, huh? Like, I don't really understand. I mean, talking about like having to have a central like BlackBerry server and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I vaguely understand what they were talking about, but like only vaguely. And then I'm thinking, well, then how does it work now that everyone has one? And I'm not asking you to explain it right now. What I'm saying is,
I couldn't.
What I'm saying is that it's like we have these devices and these technologies that completely rule our lives, or you might say make our lives more connected and convenient, or whatever it is, or a bit of both. And like, it's pretty scary how most of us don't know the first thing about how they work.
Is that scary? I mean, it's just like there's so much. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's always been that way. Like, we never knew how our phones worked before either, like our dial phones.
Like, some people would understand how their car worked because they could fix it, but cars are so computerized.
Like, do we know how like a microwave or a TV works? Like, we don't know how anything freaking works.
I couldn't tell you. It's all magic as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, it's like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. That's what it's about, basically.
But learning how your motorcycle works?
Yeah, but like, you shouldn't like let yourself be in this world where everything's magic to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really do live in we are quite mystified about how things work, especially technology.
Yeah.
Never mind larger processes, like how the stock market works, how does value come from that?
Oh my God.
You know, like, things like that. Like,
yeah. And then, I mean, so many of us start to believe in actual magic.
Yeah, you wonder if it's related.
Yeah.
This kind of romantic.
Because we're surrounded by stuff that like might as well be magical as far as most of us are concerned. You know, like, if you're gonna believe that your TV works and your phone works, like, why not believe that the position of the stars is like dictating your
you can shoot
your mood.
You can shoot energy from your fingertips or something as well.
Well, I don't know if anyone believes that, Aaron.
Oh, really? Like certain healing practices don't involve that?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, kind of.
I don't know. Listen, I'm not gonna. I don't mean to criticize any magical thinking, because it is certainly fun.
It's just interesting that like we seem to not know where, like, to have a shaky idea of where like reasonable turns into unreasonable in terms of like what to believe is possible and could possibly, you know, have a causal effect on what could have a causal effect on something else. And like, I do wonder if it's partly because we're constantly surrounded by things that seem to exert magical forces, just because like we don't know how they work. And like, often we're incapable of understanding how they work. Like, I don't know if I could ever really understand the inner workings of how an iPhone works, even if I spent like a year going to school to try to learn it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hopefully I'm not like a total moron.
Well, yeah, I don't think you need to do that.
But you know what I'm saying?
There's better ways you can spend your time, I think.
Yeah.
So the three main characters, they have their arcs, right, in this. So we've already talked about how Doug, I mean, okay, let's end with Doug. So Jim Balsillie, like, he's always aggressive and kind of a jerk, and he just becomes more and more megalomaniacal as the movie goes on, and he gets, as I said, distracted by his plans to bring a hockey franchise to Hamilton, an NHL hockey franchise. And I think that's so interesting. People who know more about hockey than I do would probably know more of the debates about why this doesn't ever happen, because Southern Ontario is a huge market and the Toronto Maple Leafs are the biggest, most profitable NHL team, despite being one of the poorer performing NHL teams, probably, certainly in the last several decades.
Hold on. I'm just going to ask a question.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about hockey.
Yeah.
So there's only one hockey league that's Canadian and American? There's an American hockey league that Toronto Maple Leafs are part of?
Yeah, it's the NHL.
So there's no Canadian hockey league?
No, it's mixed.
There's just one.
It's a mix. Well, I mean, there are minor leagues. It's called national,
but like it's.
Oh, I see. No, that's a fair assumption. No, it's actually Canadian and American.
Oh.
But they call it the National Hockey League.
Okay, I didn't know that.
I don't know why. I wonder what the origins of that are. I mean, even the original teams were a mixture of Canadian and American.
So then Jim Balsillie in this movie wants to move the Pennsylvania Penguins to Hamilton. And then the other NHL...
Pittsburgh Penguins. Oh. Yes, it is in Pennsylvania.
The Pittsburgh Penguins, he wants to move them to Hamilton, Ontario.
Yeah.
And
in real life...
the other board members...
Yeah, including
owners.
Gary Bettman, who's the NHL commissioner, paid by Mark Critch.
Right. They're so mad, and they're like, you're a traitor for wanting to move an American team to Canada. So, like, what's up with that?
Well, see, it's a fun scene, because that moment in the movie, in the arc of that character, we're supposed to see that his like one of his low points, because he yells at everybody. He's like, "You sons of bitches!" Or he's like really swearing at them, and like Gary Bettman is like, Mark Critch is like rolling his eyes at him. But like in real life, like Gary Bettman is a famous jerk. And also, I think the real politics behind why there isn't another hockey team, professional like NHL team in Hamilton, has to do with just the sheer dominance and influence of the Maple Leafs franchise, because they're so big and powerful, influential. They don't want a competitor so nearby to draw from their fan base. That's what I'm assuming is part of the political context for these decisions and stuff.
So,
but anyway, like
wait, Canada has the Maple Leafs, the Canadians, and what else?
And there aren't that many, considering how many how hockey is such a big sport here. Yeah. So it's the Montreal Canadiens, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs, it's the Winnipeg Jets, it's Calgary Flames, Edmonton Oilers, and Vancouver Canucks. So those are all the Canadian teams. But then there are like another, I don't know how many, 25.
Oh, wait, doesn't Calgary have?
I said Calgary Flames. So there's 25 or 20. There's 25.
Can you cut this part out?
There are like 25 or 28 American teams or something. But then there's only those 7.
Like when I think about it, I did know that they were in the NHL.
So
just when you think about it too hard, you're like, wait a minute, why national to what country? And then
this is a good point. The bringing another hockey team to Canada, like Canada's national sport. Also the idea that BlackBerry was a proud Canadian company. That is like the nationalist identity that BlackBerry had back when it was growing in the early 2000s. That still being like Canadian in that way was worth something. I think that was part of the popular appeal. That's certainly how the company presented itself in the media. Again, the only person I ever knew who was associated with BlackBerry was this Jim Balsillie guy, who now I understand in this movie was just a salesman. He was just a front man. He had nothing to do with the rest of it.
And he joined late. He
after
they latched onto them.
Yeah, but he was the guy. He was out there waving the Canadian flag, like, I'm doing stuff for Canada, Canadian industry, as well as Canadian culture. But he was a
good PR guy.
He was out trying to buy all kinds of different hockey teams, and to bring them to Hamilton. But the NHL Commission did not want a team in Hamilton, and I think it has a lot to do with competition with the Toronto market.
Okay.
So.
It just because it seemed like in the movie that it was like they were mad that he wanted to take an American team to Canada.
Yeah, we see so little of those NHL commissioner types that they're just the backdrop for Jim Balsillie's meltdown.
Yeah, okay.
I guess we see them kind of neutrally, or even victims of Jim Balsillie being mean.
Yeah.
You're like, oh wow, he's yelling at these people.
Or like it was an occasion for him to like completely melt down, really, and just have like be the author of his own demise because he like couldn't hold it together.
Yeah, so that's his arc, right? That's how I started talking about this. Is that that's his arc, is that he's that guy, and he gets more and more intense and more successful until he kind of implodes because he's trying to do too much.
Yeah.
And then we've talked about Mike's arc.
And because he broke the law a bunch.
And then there were errors in accounting, as far as we know.
Right.
The fraud had been alleged, and then how it's resolved is that there were accounting errors.
Okay.
So Mike's arc is that he is like kind of a chill, cool tech guy, and then he sells out. He becomes like a corporate office guy, and he also like in the end he kind of gets
greedy.
It's not so much greedy as that the way I see him, like in that pivotal scene where Mike is in a pitch meeting. This is actually interesting. In part 3, Jim and Mike are not together at all. So through the whole downfall, that third act where it's the downfall, Jim's off doing his own thing, and Mike is kind of left trying to sell.
Yes.
And he's not good at that. So he's in this selling meeting with Verizon.
And they're like firing.
And they're basically saying, we don't want BlackBerries anymore. And on the spot, he just like comes up with basically this idea that he's going to make a screen BlackBerry with a screen, and it's a huge mistake. But we see him like, Jay Baruchel is a good actor. I have to say, like, he's pretty good. You get these close-ups on him. He's pretty good when he's like, you see him like struggling like with feeling. Yeah, I think he was proud, and he's losing his market. He's losing his prominence in this industry, and so he's like just struggling, doing anything he can to get it back, even though the right thing to do would have
So he's like, fine, we'll make a phone exactly like the iPhone.
Yeah, I could do it. He's deluded. So he's deluded as well. And I guess, in Doug, ultimately, like his arc the lesson is people never change, apparently, because he never changes. He's always the same guy, and he's always chill.
And he gets out when he realizes,
and he's not committed to BlackBerry.
Yeah.
He's I'm just going to sell this.
Not in a delusional way. I mean, like, he's committed until he's like, this isn't what I thought it was anymore.
Yeah, so he keeps...
And he gets out.
That's true. He has a clearer view of the reality of BlackBerry and of the situation, and so he gets out. But so anyway, you do feel like for all the guys, I feel like Doug is kind of the guy you care the least about, but he's
but
cool.
You're glad to at the end when it's like he prevailed. You're like, Doug.
Yeah, that's good. Someone came out okay, I guess. I mean, everybody came out, I'm sure, very rich still, regardless.
Oh, yeah.
So just they're not giants in the industry anymore. But, But they're very, very, very wealthy people still. So it's funny, like how do you show these people having a sad ending, right? It's like, well, okay, yeah.
Well, I mean, there's having money, and then there's like being sort of on top of the world, working on some like the most innovative, newest thing. I mean,
yeah, it's true.
Like,
big difference.
Yeah, like just being in the background, having like, it would be nice to be rich, but like having your daily life be about this like
meaning and recognition and status, and instead BlackBerry's seen as a big failure, and also for a while they were like, oh, they got caught doing unethical accounting, so stuff like that, and
like knowing that you're not going to be remembered as the guy that invented the smartphone.
Well, maybe
like somehow people think Steve Jobs invented.
That's true. They do think that, don't they?
Yeah.
But the movie does. Yeah. Well, Mike Lazaridis believes he was the one to invent the smartphone.
Yeah.
What does it mean to invent the smartphone? The first guy who required you to type with your thumbs. He
got a smartphone to actually work. Like Verizon, in that first meeting with Verizon, they're talking about how like they've tried to make a phone that can do all of this, but it won't work.
They needed a server, a certain kind of server technology. Yeah. So anyway, I highly recommend this movie. I really was not expecting that much because we have very low standards for Canadian content usually. And I was like, well, people like this movie, but whatever, who knows if it's really good. And it is really good.
Yeah, it is.
It's really good.
It is really good. I don't know if I want to be on record dissing Canadian TV and movies across the board, but I will just say that, yes, it's really good.
Well, let me just say more broadly, like you never know what to believe based on what the critics say, right?
Yeah.
So you should believe these critics right here. This is a really good, fun movie. Very fun, very, very funny, interesting. So nostalgic. And if you're of a certain age. Any final thoughts about BlackBerry 2023?
2023. Oh yeah, that's the year it was made. I see. I don't think so. Just again, like it really left me with this feeling of like, the world has changed so much in the last 15 years, and it's kind of mind-boggling. The world, like we've changed so much. Like it just makes me think of the way we live our daily lives and how this invention is just completely taken over.
Yeah, and it's showing us these flashbacks to an era that was not that long ago. And then if you're middle-aged like us, you well remember living, but you've forgotten elements of it. Like, oh yeah, there weren't phones everywhere, and that changed the way you interacted with the world quite a bit.
Yeah.
So that was a really, very interesting part of this movie.
Very interesting.
Okay, Naomi, anything else to say? I think that's pretty decent treatment of the movie.
No, I think that we did a great job.
Okay. Maybe we're a little bit rusty, but we're getting back into the swing of things.
Yeah. I mean, podcasting is also a pretty new invention.
And thank gosh that you have phones. Thank God we don't want to swear any more than I have.
Yeah.
Want me to do Jim Balsillie?
No, I don't think so.
You motherfuckers! I don't know how that affects.
Comes from the diaphragm when he does it.
Yeah, I won't want to yell that loud. I think people in our condo building will get upset.
Like, it's really amazing that he doesn't just like someone who's that intense all the time. Like, they would blow their fuses. Like, they would literally be popping blood vessels, and like bits of their brain would just be popping and frying. And,
Again, Glenn Howerton's really good. Really,
yeah.
Really good. Yeah. Well, I don't want to live like that.
No.
I can't live like that.
I don't think you're in danger of living like that. Although sometimes, I mean, you throw a hissy fit. Let's face it.
Depends what's happening, but.
But I mean, imagine if you were like that all the time.
Well, I mean, the final scene, the like, where are they now? Like, Jim Balsillie is showing
Chilling,
fishing. He's out fishing.
He's wearing a cap and a nice Harvard sweatshirt.
Yeah, he was a Harvard guy.
Are there any women in this movie?
Well, certainly not the main characters.
Like, there's one secretary in the background.
Yeah. No, there aren't really many speaking lines for
and
women.
they don't, like, none of them seem to have a female partner. Like, if they do, you don't really
I don't know if anybody is... There's one scene where one of the kind of nerdy engineers, we're supposed to see him as a nerd in this moment because he comes up to the newly hired Jim, Mr. Intense Jim, and is like... or he's actually talking to Mike, but Jim's there, and he's like, well, my girlfriend told me that I can't work here anymore because my paycheck bounced. This is their early days when they're not profitable yet. And then I don't know what Jim says exactly, but I do believe he reams him out for being a weakling.
Yeah, because you don't want to be a nerd who does what his girlfriend says.
It's a very male-dominated movie, and I'm assuming it's reflecting the industry at that time, especially.
There's that one female engineer with the who makes a face.
But she doesn't speak.
No.
She's just showing there is a woman here.
Yeah.
In a room full of 50 men.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems realistic enough, really, for the time. All right.
Okay. All right. Well, bye everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.